Hello, this is Writers at Work, a podcast for readers and writers about the joys, heartaches, challenges, and satisfaction of the creative writing process. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. My guest on this episode of Writers at Work is Marie Rutkoski, whose latest novel, Ordinary Love, is a bit of a departure for her. Marie may be best known for her books for children and young adults, beginning with the Kronos Chronicles, a trio of novels that blended fantasy and historical fiction. Then came the Standalone, The Shadow Society, a supernatural romance set in Chicago in an alternate universe. Then followed by her popular Winners trilogy. Her next two books, The Midnight Lie and The Hollow Heart, are romantic fantasies with LGBTQ characters and strikingly handsome and enticing covers, which is neither here nor there, but they suit well tales of identity, class, loyalty, and sexual yearning. In January 2022, Marie published her first book, intended for adults, Real Easy, a thriller set in the seedy strip club populated by women who are more than their bodies on display. Now she returns with Ordinary Love. Set in the Tony world of New York's Upper East Side, it is a story of love gone wrong and of love that may have gotten away. Having earned an MA and PhD at Harvard, Marie is a professor at Brooklyn College, where she teaches Shakespeare, Renaissance literature, and children's literature. Clearly, Marie follows a muse of her own and has enjoyed success doing so. Let's find out how she does what she does. Marie Rutkoski, welcome to Writers at Work. A few seconds ago, I used the term muse as a force that inspires us to create. Do you believe in the concept of a muse?
Um, Not as something that's external, not as some kind of being or something that penetrates the self and then makes the self write a book or create some art. I don't believe in a muse in that way. I do think that every kind of artist is always bringing things in from the world and then kind of transmuting them into something of their own. So there is a kind of porosity, I think, between the self and the exterior world. But I think that whatever I create is something that is generated by the person that I've built myself into over the years.
Yeah, I would have thought so because your body of work suggests drive, focus, perseverance, will, and those are traits that the muse cannot provide. Agreed?
Mm, thank you.
Uh, I think writers who wait around for inspiration are not going to be writing very much.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
So, could you take us back to the start of your career as a novelist? You have an exemplary educational background. Your first book was 2008. So what led up to the writing of the first book?
Mm. Well, when ever since I was little, I wanted to be a writer. I think just in that way where when you find something you love, you want to emulate it. And I loved reading, and so it seemed like the natural thing was to create the thing that I loved. Um, and I thought of myself as a creative writer all the time up until when I was admitted to graduate school to study Shakespeare and the English Renaissance. I really felt like I had been admitted by pure luck, that there had been some kind of mistake. I went to Harvard University, and it was such a dream to go there, and it felt like an intellectual utopia and a place that I had kind of dreamed of being at for a long time. And I really, really wanted to become a professor of English literature. And that first year of graduate school, it was almost like I mentally sat myself down and I just thought, Marie, you have a chance to really prove yourself as an academic. Maybe they admitted you by mistake, but you're here now and you're going to make the most of it and you're going to prove that you have the right to be here. Um, And I don't think, Marie, that you have actually proven that you're a good fiction writer. So why don't you set that aside and focus on being an academic? And that's what I
Ah,
did. I did not write creatively for maybe 5 years. Instead, I focused on academic writing. And I think that in some ways ultimately helped me because I wrote a dissertation, and in writing that, I realized that, a nonfiction research book is not so different from a novel in the sense that what you're doing is building a story over many, many pages. You have a narrative that you want to construct. Um, and so I learned a lot of rigor. I learned how to do research. I learned how to express myself intellectually, both in writing and orally. And my last year of graduate school, I had a fellowship to do research in London at the British Library. I was doing archival research, and my days were very lonely. I lived in an apartment I rented from a history professor in Bloomsbury, and every morning I would get up, I would go to the British Library, I would work there until the library closed, and I would come home and eat dinner before this little gas stove, and then I would go to bed. And somewhere in the midst of that loneliness, and it wasn't an unhappy loneliness, there was something kind of pleasant about it. In the midst of that, in that solitude, I had the idea for my first novel. And I wrote a few chapters while sitting in the British Library while I should have been doing archival research. And it was another kind of moment, a little bit like the beginning of graduate school, where I was doing a sort of self assessment. And I thought to myself, okay, this could be a book, but you, Marie, do not have time to write it now. Finish your dissertation and then write the book. And that's what I did. I turned in my dissertation, I got my PhD, and the summer after that, I wrote my first novel.
so when you shifted there very briefly, before you went back to your dissertation, did you have some sort of chemical reaction or some kind of excitement that you were no longer confined by fact and that you could just let your imagination go?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, recently I was talking, I had an idea for a book that I don't think I'll ever write because it didn't quite work, but I was talking about it with a friend and I was thinking of setting it in Maine. And then the person said, well, you'll have to go to Maine to do some research. And I just said, why? Why would I have to go to Maine to do some research? Which is very rude. And maybe people in Maine are going to be mad at me for saying that. But that I do think sometimes I have a little bit of resistance towards researching anything that I feel that I can imagine for myself. Um, and I think that there is something very empowering and exciting about um, being the one who gets to decide what is real in the world that you create. And I think that that is why, in the beginning of my career, I was mostly writing fantasy.
Right. There is the school of thought that Isaac Asimov never went to outer space,
Right.
and then there's the other school that you need to be there to smell it rather than think about it. But that was an interesting decision by you because you wanted to control your own universe, and fantasy was the best way to do it.
Yeah, and more recently, I've been writing contemporary fiction, and I set a book, my most recent book, Ordinary Love, in Ohio, um, in rural Ohio near the Appalachian Mountains. And I mean, I've been to Ohio, of course, because when you grow up in the Midwest, I think that most kids get used to visiting the states around them. So
Right.
Ohio is one of those states, but I didn't go to that place. I made up a town in rural Ohio and tried to invest it with some of what I knew from my own experience growing up in a neighboring state, and with some mild research that I had done online.
Yeah, I have to say, and I do want to get to Ordinary Love. I will say parenthetically that I had no sense that it was not a real place in Ohio.
Oh, great,
Yeah,
great.
no, yeah. So I'm just getting back to things. At some point did you realize that you could have parallel careers?
Um,
Which you do, yes?
yeah, I do have dual careers. I think that I got very lucky because my first real job out of graduate school, I mean, at first, when I finished my PhD, I taught at Harvard as a lecturer, but that was just for 1 year. And that wasn't a tenure track position. It wasn't something that could be permanent. And so what I consider my first quote unquote real job was at Brooklyn College, where I teach now. And I think that I I just really got lucky in that I was hired by a department and by a college that wanted me to do both things, that wanted me to teach Shakespeare, but also appreciated that I was a fiction writer. They liked that I wrote books for children because there are some important classes in the English department that are taught for people who want to write children's literature, but also for people who study it because they're going to go on to become elementary and middle and high school teachers. And so it's required for them to take a children's literature course. So when I was hired, it was really to do more things than I had actually trained for as a doctoral student. So it was a bit of luck because it's not the case that in every university department, the work you do as a fiction writer will count towards tenure. And it just
Mm.
so happened that mine did. And that was amazing because I was able to do my creative work and have it count towards my professional success.
Yeah, that is very rare. So Marie, why did you choose to write YA? What was that always the goal when you said when you were quite young you made up your mind that you wanted to write fiction? Was it always going to be for young readers?
No, I didn't. I mean, when I was young, I didn't have an idea of what kind of fiction I would write. I suppose I began writing. I mean, my first books were for middle grade readers, so for the ages 9 to 12. Um, and it just so happened that the idea I had was pretty clearly a book for children. Um, and it's not that I set out to write for that particular audience. So I'm very glad I did because writing for children, young adults is really exciting. And I think one of the one of the ways in which it's most exciting for me is how passionate the readers are, and how frank they are. And I think that there is something about writing for them that has taught me the importance of capturing big emotions on the page, and the importance of keeping tension alive. And that's important for any writer, for any readership. But I think because young adult readers are so clear about what they want and they tell you what they want, and there was a lot of feedback um, given in those early days for me as a writer. I just I just learned to write not for the impatient reader, but for the reader who has um, a great desire to be swept away.
Do I'm making a note here, which is one reason I don't use the camera. Um, you said something interesting there about reader feedback. Um, was it immediate? Did you feel okay, I'm doing the job, or did you feel okay, I could do the job better based on that feedback?
I think it's both. I am maybe a rare writer in that I like to read my Goodreads reviews.
Ah,
Um, Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't know many writers who do that because sometimes the Goodreads reviews can be really harsh. It's almost like a game to see how mean you can be in a review sometimes. Um, and I do think that there's something, I don't know, I too can like a review that is really incisive. Like I love reading reviews by Andrew Long Chu, who's an amazing writer, and a critic of fiction for adults. And she just has an insane talent for exposing the flaws of some
Mm.
writers. So I get why people like a review that is negative rather than positive. But I think for most for most writers, they don't want to turn to Goodreads for feedback. But what I tend to do whenever I have a new book out is to read every review um, up until maybe about a month after the book is out. And so I've seen some things about, say, Ordinary Love, the book that just came out in June, and after a while, you do begin to see trends of what people like and don't like about books. And so, one thing that really surprised me about reading the reviews for Ordinary Love, and I do feel like I'm straying away from your question, and I
No, no, no,
apologize.
no, not at all.
Um,
Go ahead, please.
but there is a part of the book focuses on the main character Emily's marriage to a man named Jack, and how it seems really perfect at the beginning. He's adoring, he's wealthy, he's handsome, he's nice to her friends, he's very understanding, he thinks that she's perfect. But over the years, you see just how manipulative he is and how able he is to gaslight her. It's a really slow vice of emotional abuse that tightens around her to the extent that she begins to doubt her own reality. And when I wrote that, this I think this might be surprising to some people who've read the book, but I didn't even think of it as a major part of the novel. I really think of the book as being primarily a love story. But that particular part of the book has really hit home, it seemed, for many readers. And so a lot of reviews have commented on the way in which I portray emotional abuse. And that was a bit of a surprise for me.
So would the reviews and reader reaction alter your next work?
Mm, probably not. Well, I don't know. I can't think of an example where I saw a review and then it altered my next work, but like to think I do like to think that I'm getting better, or at least I try to get better. I might not be succeeding, but one of the things, and I've been thinking about this lately, that I've been trying to improve on is writing more plainly. I think that I think that something that is both a blessing and a curse for me as a writer is that it's very easy for me to describe things in a lovely way or describe things in a creative way, to use unusual metaphors. And I think that that can be nice. I think there is something appealing for readers in seeing something through the filter of something else, which is how a metaphor or a symbol works, right? You're looking at the object, but you're looking at it through another thing. So you're seeing both things at the same time. Um, so it is a little bit like putting a filter on, or a lens, like a colored lens on something that you're studying. And that can be really exciting and can make you see the thing that's being written about in an entirely new way. But I think it is harder for me to write something as honestly as I can, to write something as plainly as I can, and to write something that has no frills, but feels really true. And I've come to value that more and more, both as a reader and as a writer, and I'm trying all the time to get better at that.
I think that there's a difference between a reader's desires and a reader's needs. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's the novelist's responsibility to fulfill the reader's desires.
Right.
I do think it's our responsibility to meet the reader's needs. And that I think gets to something you were talking about writing plainly, because the best way to achieve that, in my opinion, is technically,
Yeah.
to be direct, as you say, be honest, to lay bare through the use of direct language and um, I think is for me the danger of reading reviews, which is I don't read reviews because I
Mm,
think uh, we love our readers, so our
mhm,
instinct would be, oh, I owe them. They've pointed out a flaw. I owe them to address that flaw. I don't think that's the case. I think we owe them to be honest and direct.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I really like what you've just said about how readers have desires and readers have needs, and attending to the reader's needs is more important than fulfilling their desires. I really believe that. It reminds me of something that I think Ishiguro said about the endings of books, where he said that for him something that's important is to leave the ending a bit unfinished, because the test of what makes a book really special, at least according to him, is that it lingers in the reader's mind, right? That the reader is still thinking about that book, and the reader will still continue to think about that book if there are some elements that are not quite neatly tied up in a bow at the end of the novel. And I really appreciated hearing him say that, because I think for a long time I felt that there's a kind of literary way of ending a novel where it doesn't give you all the answers. And sometimes I felt like that's a cop out, where I thought, oh, you just didn't know how to end your novel. And then when I heard him say that, I thought, no, Ishiguro is right. There is a way in which, if you don't answer everything, or if you don't tie it up so neatly, it's going to linger in the minds of readers. And I think that that's a good example of fulfilling a need rather than a desire, because I have read some reviews of Ordinary Love where readers have said that they loved the book, they loved getting swept up in the emotions, but they wanted more out of the ending. And that's why they were going to downgrade it a star or a half a star. And I just thought, yes, that's right. I'm glad you want more. I'm glad that it's not totally finished for you, because it means you're still thinking about it.
right, right. Yeah. So I'm actually thinking about something you said earlier regarding academic writing versus writing fiction.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's akin to journalism.
Mm,
When I was doing my journalism, it was because I was a critic. This is my thought, and I'm really not interested in dialogue.
mm,
I'm bringing I'm delivering to you an informed opinion.
hmm,
If you want to write me an email and argue, that's fine, but you don't have a voice in this column.
hmm.
Versus in my novels, we are doing this story together.
Yeah.
You have a lot of input in this. Do you think that is that a parallel with academic writing versus fiction writing?
That's so interesting. I've never really thought about that before. And I was thinking about what you said about journalism and presenting an argument. And I do think that maybe there's a bit more clarity in journalism, not as to the truth necessarily, right? Because journalists are always, they bring their own opinions to the table. And it's not like they're presenting some unfiltered or unvarnished truth to readers, but there is maybe an argument to an op-ed that doesn't leave a lot of room for debate. Whereas I think in academic writing, when it's done really well, um, it's different, because there's often an effort to build in counter arguments or to address counter arguments or to make a soft kind of claim. And this is something that I talk with my students about, which is that you don't always have to go in making a claim about, let's just say, about the novel Passing by Nella Larson. You don't have to make a claim that is very, and maybe this is ironic for me to say, very black and white, or something that is so strict. You can make an argument that is a little bit more like, it is possible to think X. However, I think Y, or I think a combination of X and Y, or I think that X is correct, but I think not enough attention is being paid to Y, right? Like there's a way in which you can acknowledge other truths alongside the one that you're trying to construct. Or at least that's the kind of academic writing I like to do, and that's probably why I wouldn't be a very good journalist. And in terms of, and so maybe, you know, I'm pausing or hesitating a little bit because I've never thought about this before. I mean, maybe at least in terms of the kind of fiction writing I do, there's a similarity between the kind of academic arguments I want to make, in that um, I don't write a novel that is going to come down really hard on one a truth or another. I'm not in it to make an argument. I guess like you, I see it as more a collaboration with the reader. I see myself as putting forward some ideas, but leaving room for others that a reader can supply. In the case of that marriage that I was describing earlier, that I wrote about in Ordinary Love, um, many people see Jack, the husband, as being pretty villainous. And I definitely can see that. At the same time, because I tried so hard to make certain that he wasn't a purely evil person, or at least to lend some complexity to him, I did try to make him seem maybe not sympathetic, but you can understand why he is the way that he is.
Marie, I hate him. I hate Jack. I hate I hate Jack.
Yeah.
Don't defend Jack.
No, no, no. I'm not here to defend him. I'm not here to defend him. I think I wanted to write a villain where you can hate him, but maybe still find some pity in you for him at the same time. But I don't think most people. It doesn't seem that most people have pitied him at all.
You know, in The Godfather, when Don Corleone grabs Johnny Fontaine, who's
Mhm.
crying, and he smacks him and he says, "What's wrong with you? You know, be a man."
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to do with Jack in most of the book. And I'm sorry, we're off track here.
No, no,
So
no.
you're getting reader feedback on your YA books. Did that have anything to do with you shifting to writing for adults?
No, not really. Um, my first novel for adults was a crime novel called Real Easy. It came out
Yeah.
a few years ago. And I mean, that's a novel that centers around a strip club, and it's about what happens when one dancer is murdered, another goes missing, and a third tries to get to the bottom of what happened. And it would be a hard sell to claim that that book could be for young adults, right? I mean, I think
Right,
anyone
right.
could see in the description of it that that is an adult story, right? And so I just knew that the idea I had was one that was for a different audience.
Did you hear from any readers who felt abandoned?
Um, no, I haven't. I mean, I have heard from readers who have said, when are you going to write another young adult book? My 16-year-old son read the Winter's Curse books last summer, and he would love for me to write more books like that. And it was so special too, because he's a very honest kid, and so it seemed like he did genuinely enjoy them. But something that I have seen, and again, like I'm going on Goodreads reviews, because at the moment that's kind of the only feedback that I've had from readers who I don't know personally. Um, but something that's been really sweet to see is that some readers have grown up and they began reading my books when they were in high school, and now they are adults. And I am writing books that are for them. So I think that there is a segment of my readership that is like that. And that's something, it feels like an honor. It feels like an honor to have written books that have walked alongside some people as they've moved through the years.
It is to have what is better than having a loyal readership?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I understand. So getting back to the concept of research and imagination, uh, you had some experience in the world of strip clubs?
Yes, I did. I worked as a dancer in two different clubs in my early 20s, and it was certainly, in some ways, a difficult experience, and in other ways, enriching, quite literally enriching. But it also really put me in touch with a lot of different kinds of people that I would have never met otherwise. I'm mostly thinking of other dancers at the club.
And at that point, you had options, correct? I mean, you had academic options. My impression is that, and I don't know this for a fact, so jump down my throat if you must, but I have the impression that many people who work in that industry don't have options.
Mm, um, I think that, like with many things, um, stripping and other kinds of sex work, the people who practice that, there's no monolith. There's no
I see.
one kind of person who does that work. There are some people who do that because they don't have other options, or they don't have other options that they would prefer. Um, and there are other people who do it as a side hustle, on their way to doing something else. Like I worked with women who were getting their real estate license at the same time that they were working at the club. So essentially, they were working two jobs, which, you know, um, in the past couple decades in the United States has become more and more common, where it is not enough to have just one job
Right.
to meet your needs. It has been a long time since people were able to say work in a factory and make enough money to own their own home. That was something that was far more common in earlier generations than it is for mine or younger generations too. Having more than one job is common, and in fact, that is the life that I have now. I mean, it's because I want to, but
Right.
I I teach and I write books.
Yes.
Um, so I would say that there are many different kinds of people who work in that industry, and I've met many people who are doing it for various reasons. Some people do it just because they like it, because they find it empowering, because they want to maybe work for a summer to make enough money to do something exciting. And it's a, you know, you if you have the kind of inclination to work at a place like that, like a strip club, you can pretty easily make enough to quickly fulfill some other dream that you have. Like many of the women who I met were very ambitious. They wanted more than what they had in their life, and I respect that. So in terms of whether I had options, I would say Sure, I did have other options. There were other ways in which I could have made money, but um, I think that it was something that I wanted to explore doing. I was maybe 22, 23 when I did that. So, that's a long time ago. That was more than 2 decades ago. And I'm in a very different place now than I was then. Um, and, it wasn't as if I had, like, I already had my doctorate, and I already had a job as a professor. Um, and Yeah, I suppose the reason that worked at the first club was precisely because of what I mentioned earlier, which is that I had something that I wanted to do. And at that time, which was right after I graduated from college, from my undergraduate institution, I wanted to move to Russia, which I would never do now. This was in 1999. Russia was a very different time,
Right,
and
right.
it was a very different culture and at a very different place in its evolution as a country. And I had this idea that I wanted to move to Moscow. I didn't have enough money, and I worked over the summer to make enough money to live abroad. And I ended up living abroad for an entire year. I went to Moscow. I stayed there for 3 months. And then I moved to Prague, where I got a job teaching English. And I used my savings to essentially finance a year of living in other countries, which I wouldn't have been able to do otherwise.
So this is a kind of left turn here, but how did you like writing a thriller?
It's very hard. It's very difficult. And I'm proud of Real Easy because writing a mystery and making it such that you surprise your readers, or if you do not surprise them and they see what's coming anyway, they're still nonetheless interested in what's on the page, and they're interested in that kind of dramatic irony that occurs when the reader knows something that the characters don't, where the readers figured it out first. That's a very hard thing to do, and I like to think that I did it, or I hope I did. And I would also say that I I got very ambitious when writing Real Easy, and that the project was to write a murder mystery um, that was told through many different points of view. There are, I think, about 14 different points of view
Wow.
in that novel, and some we only get once. So each chapter is in a character's point of view, not all different characters. Like there's a detective named Holly, and we get chapters from her point of view throughout the novel. But then there are some characters who only get one chapter, and you never hear from them again.
I see.
And it's quite a challenge to build a mystery that is refracted through the viewpoint of so many different characters. And I don't know if I will do that again. I don't see writing another um, mystery in the cards for me at the moment.
I did want to ask you if your editor or your agent wanted you to write another one, but
I've been really lucky that my I love my agent. She's amazing. She's so smart, and I really trust her. And I've been lucky in that she just wants me to produce something that's good.
okay. I just want to say something for our listeners. Marie has COVID and she's also in France. So we've taken quite a bit of her time. I thank you for that, Marie. And finally, Ordinary Love. Here we are. How did that book come to be?
Mm. I would say that I had two sources of inspiration for that novel. One was rereading Persuasion by Jane Austen. Ordinary Love is by no means a retelling of Persuasion, but I will say that Persuasion is maybe the first second chance romance that we have in Anglo-American literature. And Ordinary Love is also, in terms of genre, second chance romance. So there's that. But also, in case your readers don't know or don't remember Persuasion, it's about this woman named Anne Elliot who, when she was much younger, fell in love with a young man. Um, and he proposed to her, and she was persuaded by her kind of snobby, minor aristocratic family to turn him down because he has no money, he's not high enough in class, and he has no prospects. And he's heartbroken and goes away and joins the Navy. And he comes back to town when Anne is older and she's never had another offer of marriage. She's a bit of a spinster. And now this man is Captain Wentworth, and he is dashing, he's wealthy, he's prestigious, and he is the catch of the town, and women want him. And the question is whether he and Anne Elliot have a second chance. And when I was rereading that novel, I thought, ooh, it would be really delicious to write a queer love story in which the Captain Wentworth like figure is not a man, but instead is a queer butch woman. And that is the figure of Jen in Ordinary Love, who is the main character's love interest. And much like Anne Elliot, Emily, my main character, falls in love with Jen when they're really young, and that ends in heartbreak. And Emily goes on to marry a man, and Jen, meanwhile, becomes this famous Olympic athlete. So here's where it departs from Persuasion. She becomes a famous Olympic track athlete, and um, she's also famous for being out and queer. She's seen as being hot. She models sometimes. She's always dating actresses and breaking their hearts. So she's become quite a lady killer, and has a lot of what people in the romance writing world call power markers, like signs of power, um, like Captain Wentworth does. So that was one source of inspiration. I'm sorry, my answer is getting so long.
No, not at all, not at all.
Maybe I
Um,
should just stop there. That was one main source of
you know,
inspiration.
I knew Jen before I knew Sophie Cunningham. You know Sophie Cunningham, right?
No, I don't.
Oh my God, Sophie Cunningham. I say no more. You'll look up Sophie Cunningham.
Okay, okay, I'm
Uh,
excited. Can't wait to
yeah.
find out.
No, you've done a really good job of putting us inside the story without giving too much away. Um, and this goes to the quality of your writing. At one point, I had a very odd reaction. I was thinking, Emily, you've got to get out of there. And I realized that I was reacting as almost if I was reading a horror story.
Mm,
There wasn't somebody with a knife chasing Emily, but I saw that her life, um, not the literal life, but her life was going to be ended by this guy, Jack, if she didn't escape his clutches.
hmm
Um, so when you're writing that kind of book, um, your peaks and valleys can't be so extreme, that you can't lead us to that moment of horror like Stephen King does. You have to seduce us into this horror.
hmm
That requires a discipline as a writer, I think.
hmm
Yes, no?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I wanted to write that relationship in a subtle way, where the horror does creep up on you slowly.
Yeah. I would call it things unfold rather than explode.
Hmm
And did you have that in your first draft? Did you think that you had, you had the sort of tone and tempo you wanted?
Well, maybe I should just, maybe I should say what the book is about, before I answer that question, just because I want to make sure that, um, yeah, I just want to make sure I'm not confusing anyone when I answer the question.
Okay.
So I think that, um, based on what we've already talked about, it's probably pretty clear, what the kernels of the story are. Like, you have this young woman who falls in love with another woman when they're very young, and it doesn't work out, and she finds love elsewhere in this man who seems to be perfect, but is, as you've suggested, a horror story, right? Like a very slow moving horror story. Um, and we meet Emily, just as she's getting out of that marriage. The beginning of the novel shows her exiting that. And soon after that, running into Jen, for the first time in maybe 15 years. They meet each other at a party. And time has really changed them. And thinking of persuasion again, I think something that's so special about that book is that, what it does, and what any second chance romance novel does, not that this is a romance per se, but any second chance love story does, is that um, it creates the possibility for the characters to measure who they are against who they were. And that's something that Emily is constantly doing as somebody who's now in her early 30s, and she's, a single mother. She's got two kids. And she's seeing Jen for the first time in a long time, and they've both changed, right? A lot has happened to Emily. She's been in this, pretty emotionally abusive marriage, and Jen has become famous. And they're both really heartbroken by the other. Um, and so, the question of, how their pasts are going to influence their present is really vital to the novel. And so, this is a way in which I'm trying to answer your question about, the slow vice of, or the subtle way in which the horror of Emily's marriage to Jack is captured. Because, um, soon after she runs into Jen again, we're thrown back into the past, and you see the evolution of her marriage to Jack. And you see, the trauma of that relationship. And I think that it had to be, or I tried to do it in a really subtle way, and in a really slow creep of a way. So that's not like a Stephen King novel, as you said, though much respect to him, I love his books.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so it's not like a sudden, mm, what I mean to say is that it's told in like kind of a slow evolution.
Yeah, no,
And
that phrase "slow creep" is perfect.
mm,
It really is. Um, because I never did not feel tension.
hmm
Um, and I found that to be a very strong pull through. And I don't know that that's very easy to achieve, because for most of the book, things are rather calm,
mm,
and life is unfolding before our eyes, and we recognize these people.
mm,
And it isn't until certain turns in the story where we realize how trapped Emily is, for example, or how
hmm
Jen, despite her celebrity, has a yearning that is not being fulfilled. I think it's much easier to write big explosive things than to have, I love this expression you use, slow creep, slow vice. Yeah. So anyway, we've taken so much of your time. What's next for you, Marie?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what's next. Um, I have a couple different, book ideas, and I'm tinkering with them, and I'll just see which one which one pulls me in one direction or another.
All right. My guest has been Marie Rutkoski, author and educator whose latest is Ordinary Love. Marie, thanks so much for joining me on Writers at Work.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure, and I've loved your questions and your insights. Thank you so much.
Writers at Work is a production of Bliss Publications. Erin Mitchell is our producer. Music is by Joni Mitchell, performed by Keith Jarrett. For more, see writersatworkpodcast.com. I'm your host, Jim Fusilli. Until next time, happy reading.